me add a question we haven't talked about here because it's one that's intrigued me. We've all read the Military Commissions Act, and there's, I think, some consensus that it does not fully comply with our international obligations. Just for the sake of discussion, if Congress were to pass a law immunizing people from prosecution for war crimes or facilitating, shall we say, war crimes, do you see any potential for, there's obviously no domestic liability because of the speech or debate clause. What about international liability for war crimes or being tried for a violation of the laws of war?
Well, I think there's probably a consensus among the panel members that international liability certainly remains. You know, your travel plans would have to be conducted accordingly. So,
I want to turn to a special favorite of mine, Executive Order 13444. Some of you may have read an op-ed I did in the Washington Post with General P.X. Kelly. They called it War Crimes in the White House. I was invited to sit in on a Justice Department conference call before they announced the order, and they sent it around, and I read it. I just wanted to scream. The essence of it was the CIA is not allowed to pull out fingernails or whatever if their purpose is to humiliate the detainee. Implicit in that is that you do pretty much you want as long as your purpose is to get intelligence information or stop a terrorist attack. I was on several of these calls, and usually there are a dozen or so questions afterwards. I asked the first one, and I said, do you understand you're setting up the President of the United States to be tried as a war criminal? And that pretty much ended the call. I don't think there were any questions after that. But I want to ask Joe, 20 July of last year, the President signed the executive order, apparently carrying out the obligation of the Military Commissions Act to issue an executive order clarifying what techniques by non-military detainers, I guess you'd call it, we're basically talking about the CIA, what techniques they can use without violating Common Article 3. Would you pick up on your take on this, and I'd invite the others too if they want to join in.
Well, it gets into a larger conversation that we don't have time for here, but this is, in my estimation, the great enduring miscalculation of this administration. Not only is it misguided in its functional sense, that is these techniques, is the flexibility, the latitude to use these techniques necessary to get the information, that they're simply mistaken. But, I suppose conceivably reasonable minds could differ. It strikes me as difficult now to take the position that we still need to use those techniques. Maybe they could have taken it, in September, October, November of '01, when you didn't have when you were sort of in the grip of a different state of mind. But even if you give them good faith at what they're continuing to do, the real miscalculation now is the domestic effect, the way that the artful dodging and the careful, lawyerly redefining of fundamental notions of that which is acceptable American behavior becomes the defining characteristic of this administration's approach to the interrogation of people held in custody. What it does is it degrades the great social and the moral and psychological unifier during times of war in this country. The pattern of thought in this country that has endured since before the Republic is that in order to achieve this social unity, we need to be able to define the enemy as fundamentally other than us. That they exist on a plane, and this leads to a lot of abuses, and needs to be careful about that, but they exist on a plane, a social plane, that is fundamentally different than us. They do not have a commitment to law. They do not have a commitment to civilized conduct. They do not have a commitment to transparent behavior. They do not have a commitment to democratic institution. And that has endured for centuries. And the object of our ire changes. But that notion endures. And 18th century it was the Illuminati, and in the 19th century it was the Catholics, and to a lesser extent the Masons, and in the 20th century it was the Jews and the anarchists and the radicals and the communists and the Japanese and the Germans. And the rhetoric of it that creates this social glue for us is that they are fundamentally different than who we are. They do not have our capacity to comply with civilized behavior and democratic institutions. And the idea that this administration would continue to adhere to the proposition that you can strap a person to a board, invert his head downward, and dunk him underwater, and that's consistent with American values, it degrades that. It degrades that sense of the other. And that's what breaks down, that's what forces people one day to look around themselves and say, what are we doing? And it eliminates the social unity that the president relies upon to get his policies in place. And that's what reclaims the voices of tolerance and dissent that go away when we are in the heat of things. And that's what has led to its undoing. That's one of the many things that has led to the undoing of these policies. And he doesn't see it. He doesn't get it. It's really remarkable.
Can you pass the mic down to David and then Sean, because both want to...
Sean, you want to respond first? We're